Dear viewers, welcome to Musings of Maverick, where I'm your host Maverick, and today we're going to be doing the series review of, hopefully, the first season of ZombieLand Saga. So, the finale episode was dropped a few days ago, and I've had some time to regather my thoughts as well as make a final conclusion on this series. So, to give a too long didn't read of this review, do I recommend it, and should you watch it? And the answer is a resounding yes, okay? This series has honestly been probably my favorite of this season, alongside Bunny Girl Senpai. The two are not really comparable since they excel in different things, but at least in terms of entertainment value, I would probably give the edge to Zombieland Saga. Its humor is just fantastic, and it hits a lot of points where it hits all my points, right? So I haven't been this excited to wait for a next episode of a series in a long time now. So with that out of the way, right now I'm going to try to give my non-spoilery spoiled review of this series first, and then maybe afterwards we can go more in depth with some spoilers. So, who is this series for? Well, I think the easiest answer would be to those who like comedy. It's comedy. You can't really make a direct comparison to what kind of comedy it is, but the closest that I would say is maybe something like Gintama. Gintama is one of my favorite animes series, or series in general, and Zombieland Saga, while not being quite as over the top as Gintama is, definitely has the same sort of absurdist humor within it. So things happen where you think to yourself, why is this happening at this time? Like, this is so ridiculous, right? But it's done in a good way, and even if it's absolutely ridiculous, you still laugh your heads off when you see it. So definitely, if you like humor, then this is a good series to follow. And then the second part would obviously be if you like to watch idol anime, right? Especially if you like the kind of more, I guess you could say, populist idol anime, such as those in the Love Live or Idol Master, Wake Up Girls, that kind of fashion. Now, I know that's not the entirety of idol anime. There's no need to be pedantic, right? These are some of the most popular titles, and it's generally what most people think of when they think of idol anime. This archetype of idol anime. If you do like it, okay. Actually, first things off, if you don't like idol anime or you don't watch it, it's perfectly fine. Even though this series through and through is still an idol anime. Let's get that out of the way. It's not exactly a parody or a deconstruction. It has some parody elements in it, but through and through, the main story is still an idol anime at its core, right? But you don't need to really have an understanding of the idol industry or idol anime in order to enjoy this series. A lot of people are touting it as sort of like an introduction, a gateway drug to idol anime as a whole, and I would say I agree with that viewpoint. It definitely makes it so that you can know about or learn about a lot of different tropes of idols and idol anime in general, whilst not being so into it, right? It's basically like dipping your toes or maybe up to your knees in the water, but you're not entirely submerging yourself into the entire world of idols. But definitely, I feel that your enjoyment of this series would be heightened if you have some understanding of either idol anime, you've watched idol anime, or you're like me where you haven't watched many idol anime, but at least you have some knowledge of the current Japanese idol industry. There are definitely some references, some tropes in there that you would only get if you have at least a basic understanding of this kind of stuff. But even if you are going in completely blind and with no knowledge at all, I feel like that just the humor itself is enough to carry the series, to make it as a good recommendation to watch, right? Though definitely, if you do have some other knowledge, like for me personally, I loved how they reference a lot of different things, and then you can laugh at, sort of like an inside joke at that part. So there's that idol aspect. And of course, finally, if you are a fan of, cute girls doing cute things, uh, even though that's, I guess some would consider it a trashy genre of anime, but it is what it is, right? I'm sure a lot of us and a lot of anime fans out there enjoy watching cute girls doing lots of different cute things. This series doesn't really quite go full moe, right? It's not definitely not completely fluffy cute, but it's still girls doing some pretty cute things with some very cute facial expressions and kawaii, right? So there's definitely that aspect as well. So if you like any of these three things, or even a combination of them, I feel like this would be a good series for you to pick up. Um, is there any cons, some bad points about this anime? Well, definitely. I still have some uh, I still have some things to nitpick about this series. Like, for instance, the animation could be better. Even though, generally speaking, it's done fairly well, you could definitely tell that there were some scenes where the animation had a drop off in quality. If you notice in the credits, a lot of it is also outsourced, so it's to be expected, I guess. But it's not at the point where it's so jarring or so that you would get turned off by it, right? For the most part, I feel like it's okay and there's no problems, at least for me, watching the animation of this series. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is then the CGI performances, and well, it's to be expected, right? Any anime where you have to go through a lot of dancing or playing or whatnot would have to rely on CGI. Otherwise, the entire thing would just take too long, too many resources, and too much budget to make. Um, so it's just a thing now of the industry, and I feel like it's useless to cry over this and say that, oh, I don't like 3D animation, so anything with 3D animation I wouldn't touch. I think that's a little bit too extreme. This is slowly becoming the industry norm, so you might as well accept it, right? With that said, though, the 3D animation in this series definitely has its flaws. Like, I'm not saying it's entirely unwatchable, but there are much, much better 3D animation scenes that you can find in a lot of different animes. So, I guess you could say that that is sort of like a negative point of this series, but I feel like overall it's okay for me, right? It's okay. I'm not to the point where I can't continue watching because of the animation. Um, the story itself definitely, because if you really think about it, there's not exactly a main point to this series, right? The main story, if you call it that, doesn't really pick up much progress until maybe the final episodes of this series. So definitely don't go into it expecting some uh overall story that inter that interconnects all the episodes, right? It's definitely not that kind of series. And also, you don't really get much character development, due to the fact that this series mostly concentrates, like, without getting into spoilers, right? Is the series is more about the various girls coming into terms with their past, and but not necessarily having them develop as a character, which should be more reminiscent of a lot of actual idol animes, where through going through various different events and whatnot, they can develop their character, have character growth. It's definitely not this. So if you do want to watch this kind of thing, there's maybe one or two girls have this kind of episodes for them. Um, that would be it. Uh, Also, a quick clearing up, right? So there's this very popular misconception that this anime was built in part to promote Saga. That is not entirely true. So it's a byproduct of this anime being produced, but it's definitely not its main mission, right? It's not that because the Saga Prefecture wanted to build a series where they could they could promote Saga, and so they commissioned this anime. It's definitely not that. I read some interviews and looked up some sources, and really I think the only reason why it was built in, why they centered it in Saga, was because one of the production company's bosses was from Saga, and so they decided to, because using sort of like local idols as a main focus point, they decided to pick Saga. And then the Saga Prefecture, the public relations department of the Saga Prefecture, decided to help out with the production as they would help out any other different movie or anime that was being filmed in Saga. So definitely it's not commissioned by them, but they did support a lot of it. So you can't really say that this series' main point is to promote Saga. That's a byproduct of producing the series. So there's that. Just a quick tangent on on this part. So those were the negative points that I would say I have to point out of this series. But I feel like the series more than makes up for it by the variety and amount of original songs that it had in doing a performance. Like seriously, I think the last I counted, there was maybe like 12 to 15 different songs. Of course, not all of them were we saw the performance. Some were only used as sort of like a background music. Some we only heard maybe a few seconds of. But 15 songs for 12 episodes. I feel like that's even more than some music-themed anime, actually. So definitely huge props to the producers for putting this many original songs into this anime, and they're all varied as well. So they each have different themes and different. I wouldn't really say genre of music, but maybe a parody of a genre of music, because if you boil it down, they're all technically pop, except that they're pop mixed in with lots of different elements. Some elements of 80s, 90s, 2000s, some elements of different genres like metal or rap or rock. But in the end, they're still all pop. And at least it's varied enough that you would feel you're not listening to the same thing again and again. Which is something that, a lot of idol anime would probably have a problem with. Because if you well, I don't really want to generalize and say a lot of them sounds the same, but definitely, unless you have an ear for it, they're idol songs, right? So they do have at least that underlying foundation that's the same. So, in any case, that is my non-spoiler review for ZombieLand Saga. Definitely, I feel like you should just check it out. Even if you just check out the first one or first two episodes, that would be enough to give you a general idea of how this series is going to go. There are definitely some weaker episodes in this series, but again, just looking at the first two, and you should generally have an idea of whether or not you like this humor or the subject matter. And if you don't like the humor, if you don't like what you saw in the first one or first two episodes, you're probably not going to like the things in the latter episodes as well, because humor is such a big part of this series. So, in any case, that has been my non-spoiler review, and I'll see you guys after a quick cut to the spoiler reviews. Alright guys, welcome back, and this part starting for would be the spoiled section of the review. So if you haven't watched this series yet and you want to watch it yourself without spoilers, turn away now. Alright? So, talking about this is going to be more of a general thoughts rather than, any particularly structured review of this series. So definitely, I did not go into this series blind. The reason that I picked up this series is because I saw a clip of the infamous truck scene on YouTube, actually, because I follow seiyus, I follow voice actors, and what kind of stuff that they're doing. So YouTube recommended to me a video where the voice actors of ZombieLand Saga reacted to the scene of the first episode of this anime, and so I was completely shocked at even when looking at their reactions. And I thought, wow, this is such an awesome twist in the beginning of the episode. So I want to see more. And so I went to saw the first episode, and I was immediately hooked. And it turned into like one of my favorite series, as I mentioned before. So there was definitely that. I knew instantly from the first episode that this was going to be a series that I liked. Not just because of the twist itself, but not just because of the twist of Truckun itself, but because lots of different twists, right? If we go back to the first episode, that is structured so well, I feel. First you have the cheerfulness, and then instant twist into Truckun, into like heavy death metal, right? And then instantly change into more of a horror scenario. And they actually built the they made the environment and sound effects very authentic as well. You really felt that you were watching a horror series at that time. And then instantly change into absurdist humor, right? So I loved how within the first episode they already showed this many different kinds of atmosphere changes, and it keeps you on your feet, right? You're not going to just settle down and say, yeah, this is going to happen, that is going to happen. No, you're kept guessing all the time, and you don't really know what's happening. And I feel like that's the morale of the story throughout the series as a whole, right? You can't really predict what's going to happen next, because a lot of times it doesn't really make sense. Part of the absurdist humor, but I feel like that also is what makes this series so entertaining, precisely because you cannot predict what is going to happen next. So anyways, in the first episode, besides all those atmosphere changes I liked, I also really like Kotaro's character and how his character sort of clashed with Sakura, right? Because Sakura, even though she seems meek and shy and whatnot, she has no problem being being a realistic retorter when is needed of her. So you have Kotaro going through all these different kinds of speeches to try and convince Sakura, and Sakura's just like, no, I don't buy into this bullcrap. And I don't know, for me that's just so funny. And then of course there's the first performance and whatnot. So I was hooked, and that carried over to the second episode as well. The third episode, I would say I definitely agree with most people, I guess, that it is the weakest episode of the entire series. I understand why it had to be made. I understand what they were trying to convey with it. I just feel like they could have still did it better, incorporating more comedic elements into it while still giving it the serious vibe, as we see that they're clearly able to do in the latter episode. So episode 3 was definitely more meh for me, and it's a shame really, because it comes off right after two great episodes in episodes 1 and 2. So that immediate drop off is even more jarring to me. It would have been maybe a little bit better if it was sandwiched somewhere between the latter episode. Well, that doesn't really make sense either. Sorry. We should say that they just should have done some way to improve the overall pacing and story of that one episode. But definitely episodes 3 to 5 were more of, if episodes 1 and 2 were to establish the tone of the series, then episodes 3 through 5 were definitely episodes that established French Shushu as a group, right? So they're starting their activities, and we can see basically what an idol group is supposed to do, because like I said before, this series can also be seen by fans of, even if you're not a fan of idol anime. So it gives like some basic introduction to what idols are supposed to do, what's expected of them, and so on and so forth. Episode 6 and 7, the Ai and Junko episodes. Now, from a episode wise, they might not be my favorites, but the subject matter, definitely I feel like those two are the most interesting, because they dealt with the idol clashes, right? The idol philosophy clashes. I thought this is very interesting because it's true, right? It's entirely true. How idols behaved from the 80s versus how idols behave in the late 2000s and the 2010s, all the way up to the modern age. and I feel like it's refreshing because this is something that lots of people would know, but I don't think I've seen a series or any media try to properly convey the differences between these two, at least put it in this sort of conflict. Always on television or whatnot, you can see current idols and former idols sort of collaborating with each other, and they're on public television, right? So of course they're not going to have any specific conflicts, but still, for me personally, at the back of my mind, I've always wondered what the former idols, those legendary former Showa idols, think about the current idol situation of Japan, and where in their mind it's really similar to what Junko is experiencing, right? So it's definitely an episode where I feel you can enjoy more if you have some basic understanding of the idol scene in Japan. If not, then this entire conflict might seem a little bit contrived, and I've seen lots of reactors on YouTube basically say they don't understand what the big deal is, and it's definitely a little bit exaggerated. I could say, but to me it makes perfect sense why the conflict would exist in the first place, as well as the final resolution. It also made sense how they just make it so that it's part of character, so character driven idols instead of any overall archetype solo idols like Matsuda from the past, from the 80s, 70s, or idol groups like AKB and their sister groups of current modern day Japan. So from that perspective, from a story perspective, I really liked those two episodes. And starting from episode 6 all the way up to episode 10, I guess you could say we are going through all the individual character episodes. Now, again, I'm sad that Tai and Yugiri didn't have theirs, but hopefully second season, right? So immediately after the story of, or the subject matter of Ai and Junko in 6 and 7, we have Lily's story in episode 8. That one is also very high up for me in terms of enjoyment value of all the episodes in ZombieLand Saga. Like I mentioned in my review at that time, it's definitely it gives me more of a Gintama vibe, right? Because what Gintama is really good at is to make you laugh your heads off in 1 minute, and then immediately in the next moment make you want to cry your heart out. And definitely in episode 8, in Lily's episode, you get some elements of that as well, because the story itself is very sad, but then the entire way that Lily died in the first place and whatnot is so absurd, right? So there was that part. And something I also really liked, what ZombieLand Saga did, was they were trendy, right? They include the subject of being a transgender person within this anime, but they did it in a way that it wasn't obnoxious. So this was, to them, within the context of this series, this is just, okay, this is her backstory. That's it. We'll never speak of this again. And this is Lily's past, this is what Lily is now, and that's it, right? They're not trying to make a big deal out of this. No, in fact, like I said, in the latter episodes, nobody ever brings this up again. So I really liked how they handled it, and they didn't make it so they try to shoehorn this into every single thing, right? They don't need to make references. They just touch on it, and it's there, and everybody's happy. So props to them again for handling this matter, handling this kind of story in such a way. Saki's episode, again, I feel like is a bit weaker for me since it's more purely a Saki episode and not how Saki interacted with different members and whatnot. I definitely feel like the emotional impact of that episode, even though if you think about it, it does have a similar, it's a similar sad story, right? But the emotional impact of it was definitely not as good as Lily's story. But in Saki's case, because we had the new song, that definitely scored some points back for me. Sakura's episode, again, I can understand the tropes they were trying to go for, but again, I feel like that is a point where I feel the absurdity reached a level where I'm not really sure what they were trying to do, basically. Um, it's definitely, for me, also one of the weaker episodes, even though it immediately sets up to the serious episodes of 11 and 12. But the whole training in on top of a mountain thing, uh, parody or not, I don't think it was. It could have been done better. Basically, it could have been done better. And finally, the final two episodes, we have the big finale. No problems there. I liked the backstory. I liked the performances. Good stuff. Good stuff. And like I mentioned in my last episode review, they definitely went out with a bang. So, what are some other parts I like about this series? I definitely like the fact that first of all, the humor, right? And also the character interactions, as well as the various character personalities, is a big plus for me. And especially since they're not one dimensional as well. You have Sakura, right? So she's meek, she's shy, but at the same time, she's super persistent, right? So she's not the type, even though it always looks like she's weak and then she's pushed around, but when she sets her head to it, she is damn stubborn. So I definitely like that. And even when she's pushed around by Kotaru, but then she's also always the one with the most retorts as well. So I like that part about her. Saki, a lot of people's best girls. Um, she's more of a straightforward character, but hey, we love these kinds of straightforward characters. Speaks her mind and isn't afraid of anything, right? Lily, although I can see why some people would consider her annoying, especially since she has those very cutesy, childish types of voices. She also shows her savage parts as well, right? If you notice closely, a lot of times she gives the most savage of retorts to others. So, and especially combined with how she generally looks and talks, I feel like it makes a very interesting contrast between how she says it and what she actually says. So that's Lily's part. Yuguri, even though she's sort of like a classic beauty type, but she's definitely has and she looks dependable, right? But she definitely also has an airhead type of characteristic to her. I feel like in terms of character archetype, hers is probably the most generic, I guess you could say, since they're in a lot of series where there's lots of women or lots of girls, there's always this type of Onisan character. Oh, I'm sorry, not Onisan, Onesan character. But it's it is what it is. I think there's no problem with that, and they did her character well. Although again, it's sad that we didn't really learn much more about her. And I and Junko, I again, these two I feel like are more of the same, where they have the best capabilities, but then they each have their own sort of different problems. Ai's character, I definitely feel, is she's the normal person within the group, right? So she's the most realistic and whatnot. So her personality, I guess you could say, is maybe a little bit more boring because of that. It's because she's the quote unquote normal person here. So she's the one. So she's supposed to be the one that does the most retorts. Although I think that due to all the various different character interactions, they didn't really touch on that point as much as they could have. In Junko's point, I definitely feel like she's maybe the one who could have a little bit more character to her. Like, I know Junko's a lot of people's favorites as well, and I definitely love the contrast between her normal voice and the way that she sings, right? So it's actually kind of funny because I'm not sure whether this was deliberately intentional from the parts of the producers, if they from the original script writing they wanted it that way, or it's because the voice actor for Junko isn't able to sing very powerfully in Junko's original character voice. So that's an interesting food for thought, but I definitely like the contrast between those two. And then finally Tai, right? So of course Tai is definitely a favorite of everyone. You all might have your best girls, but Tai is probably always going to be directly right beside that best girl. I definitely love how she's always in the background doing something, right? It definitely gives a lot of rewatch value to the episodes where the first watch through you're concentrating on the main story and the facial expressions. Speaking of which, Sakura's facial expressions are so on point. She has the best faces, right? Although a lot of the others, such as Saki or whatnot, also have great facial expressions. But then the second watch through, you look back and then you see that Tai is doing something ridiculous again in the background. I think the most famous example of this is probably in episode 4 or 5, the Drive-In Tori one, and the Gat Olympics one. That one is definitely the one where you always notice Tai doing something in the background. But it's the same case throughout the whole series. So yeah, to me, that's definitely one of my favorite points of ZombieLand Saga as well, and that is the varied character types. So the humor, the characters, the main story, I definitely would have loved if we actually got a overarching main story here. Especially if there's some bigger conspiracy or basically a bigger scale of things within this entire series. But we have some hints of it here, right? Because there's still lots of things that are unexplained, like who is reviving these zombies, who is that dude in the bar that Kotaru was talking with, and these kinds of things. Like, why does Yugiri why were they able to revive Yugiri's body when she's at least more than 200 years old and her body should have completely decomposed by now? So these kinds of things we didn't really get here, but definitely I feel like if the setup is good enough, it's something that we can very look forward to in the next season. So that has been my thoughts on ZombieLand Saga as a whole. Definitely a good series to check out. Definitely one of my favorite series of this season. And maybe even I can say one of my favorite series in a long time. Because this is actually one where I, immediately after watching an episode, I'm wanting more, right? So anytime an anime series is able to incite this kind of feeling within you, you know that you have a very good series on your hands. So in any case, 2 thumbs up for me, and hopefully 2 thumbs up for you guys as well. And that has been my review of ZombieLand Saga. This is Musing of Mavri. I'm Mavri, and I'll see you guys next time, maybe in season 2 of this in this series, or if you would like, you can check out my other anime reviews. In any case, bye bye.